AI predicts how the zombie apocalypse will take place. Today we're diving into a fascinating and terrifying scenario, how a zombie apocalypse might unfold in the United States, as predicted by AI. But here's the thing. Sometimes it's in the seemingly impossible, the stuff of science fiction, that we find the most compelling thought experiments. Because thinking about how we'd react to a zombie apocalypse isn't really about the zombies themselves, it's about us. So let's set aside our skepticism for a moment and take a journey into the realm of the undead. Let's break down this AI's predictions stage by stage and see what chilling possibilities this thought experiment reveals. Our AI predicts that the zombie apocalypse wouldn't start with a bang, but a whimper, a cough, perhaps, or a fever. An unknown virus, maybe, or a pathogen, something spreading quietly through a handshake, a sneeze, a bite. The early signs? Easily mistaken for a new flu strain, a particularly nasty cold, a localized incident easily dismissed. Local authorities, even federal agencies like the CDC, would likely be slow to react. But as the days turn into weeks, a chilling pattern would emerge. The sick wouldn't just be getting sick, they'd be changing, becoming aggressive, irrational, driven by a hunger that knows no bounds. Now imagine the social media frenzy. Grainy cell phone videos surfacing online, showing attacks in broad daylight, people biting, scratching, transforming, fear and misinformation spreading like wildfire, faster than the virus itself. Quarantine zones might be established, martial law declared in the hardest-hit areas, but the virus, relentless and unforgiving, would breach these defenses. Hospitals, overwhelmed and understaffed, would become breeding grounds for the infection. And as the crisis spirals, as the news reports grow increasingly dire, people would start to panic. Empty shelves in supermarkets would become the norm. Imagine this: New York City, the city that never sleeps, transformed into a nightmare. The bustling crowds that once thronged Times Square replaced by hordes of the undead, driven by a primal hunger. Densely populated areas, the very heart of American life, would become the epicenters of the outbreak. Millions exposed, the virus spreading exponentially, relentlessly. Public transportation, once a symbol of urban connectivity, would transform into vectors of transmission. Subways, buses, train stations, all would become fertile ground for the virus to spread. Hospitals, already pushed to their breaking point, would be overrun. Doctors and nurses, exhausted and traumatized, would face impossible choices. And then the collapse of infrastructure. Power grids, strained by overuse and lack of maintenance, would flicker and die. Water would stop flowing from the taps. Communication systems, already overloaded with frantic calls and desperate pleas, would fall silent. Emergency services, the backbone of our society, would crumble under the relentless pressure. Those who could would flee the cities, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding around them. Highways and interstates, once arteries of commerce and connection, would become choked with abandoned cars, a testament to the mass exodus and the chaos that ensued. Picture this: the President of the United States addressing a nation gripped by fear, the declaration a nationwide state of emergency, the National Guard, the Army, the Marines, all deployed to combat an enemy unlike any they've ever faced. Military checkpoints arise at the edges of major cities, a desperate attempt to contain the infected, to establish safe zones for the uninfected. But the sheer scale of the outbreak, the relentless advance of the undead, would make this a Herculean task. Refugee camps, hastily erected and ill-equipped, would quickly become overwhelmed. Helicopters would buzz overhead, their rotors churning the air as they patrol the skies, searching for pockets of survivors, for signs of organized resistance. Airstrikes, a tactic more familiar in distant war zones, might become a grim necessity, used to level heavily infected areas, to slow the advance of the undead. But even the might of the US military would be tested like never before. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't fear death, that doesn't negotiate, that doesn't tire? The unthinkable might even be considered the use of nuclear weapons. A last resort, a desperate gamble to cauterize the wound, to prevent the infection from spreading further. Imagine a world without laws, without order, where the structures that once held society together have crumbled into dust. With the government and military struggling to maintain control, law and order would disintegrate. The rule of law, once a bedrock of civilization, would be replaced by the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. Looting, once a crime, would become a necessity. Empty stores, once symbols of abundance, would be ransacked for whatever scraps of food, water, and supplies remained. Riots, fueled by fear, desperation, and the primal need to survive, would erupt in the streets. Neighbor would turn against neighbor. Former friends would become rivals in a desperate struggle for dwindling resources. Those who could would flee the cities, seeking refuge in the countryside, hoping to find safety in numbers, in isolation. Small groups of survivors, bound by circumstance and a shared will to live, would band together, their survival dependent on their ability to cooperate, to scavenge, to defend themselves against both the infected and the desperate. Rural communities, once seen as quiet backwaters, might find themselves better equipped to weather the storm. Their reliance on farming, their knowledge of the land, their close-knit social structures, all would become strengths in a world where self-sufficiency is paramount. Doomsday preppers, often dismissed as paranoid eccentrics, would see their preparations put to the ultimate test. Their stockpiles of food, water, weapons, and medical supplies, once a source of ridicule, would become the envy of those who had scoffed at their foresight. And through it all, the economy, the engine of the modern world, would grind to a halt. Money, once the lifeblood of commerce, would become worthless, replaced by the barter system, by the cold calculus of survival. Imagine a world where the undead are not just a terrifying threat, but a fact of life, where the living have learned to coexist, however tenuously, with the relentless hunger of the dead. This is the long-term reality of the zombie apocalypse, a world reshaped by both the virus and the human will to survive. The zombies themselves might evolve. Perhaps the virus would mutate, making them faster, stronger, even more difficult to kill. Either way, survivors would need to adapt, to refine their tactics, to learn the rhythms of this new, macabre dance between the living and the undead. Those who survived the initial onslaught, who weathered the collapse of society, would face a new set of challenges. They would need to scavenge for food and water, to find or build shelter, to protect themselves from the elements and the ever-present threat of the infected. They would need to relearn skills lost in the age of convenience, how to grow crops, how to hunt, how to defend themselves without relying on the grid. New power structures would emerge. Charismatic leaders, hardened survivors, those with the skills and the will to lead, would draw followers to them. These groups, bound by loyalty, necessity, or fear, would form the basis of a new social order. Some would seek to rebuild, to create communities based on cooperation and shared values. Others, driven by paranoia or greed, would prey on the weak, their rule enforced through violence and intimidation. The search for a cure, for a way to reverse the infection, would become a desperate hope. Isolated pockets of scientists, working in hidden labs powered by generators, would struggle to unlock the secrets of the virus. Imagine a world where the ruins of our civilization are slowly being reclaimed by nature. Vines creeping up the sides of skyscrapers, trees pushing through cracks in concrete, the remnants of our world slowly fading into memory. This is the potential future, a new normal shaped by the zombie apocalypse. If the outbreak isn't contained within the first year, if the virus continues to spread, if no cure is found, humanity would be forced to adapt. The world as we know it, the world of bustling cities and technological marvels, would be gone, replaced by something wilder, more dangerous, more primal. Survivors, scattered and isolated, would carve out a new existence for themselves. Some might embrace a nomadic lifestyle, traveling light, moving from place to place in search of resources, always on the lookout for danger. Others might establish small, fortified settlements, their lives revolving around agriculture, defense, and the constant struggle to rebuild. Trade between these settlements, if it were to exist at all, would be fraught with risk. The roads, still treacherous and unpredictable, would be traveled by hardened caravans, their wagons laden with precious goods, their guards ever vigilant for bandits, raiders, or worse. And yet, even in this bleak new world, humanity would endure. We would find ways to adapt, to innovate, to rebuild. And there you have it, a speculative look at how a zombie apocalypse might unfold in the United States, as imagined by AI. Remember, this is just one possible scenario, a thought experiment designed to make us think about our vulnerabilities, our strengths, and the choices we might face when the unthinkable happens. While the threat of a zombie apocalypse might be far-fetched, The lessons we can learn from exploring such scenarios are very real. It reminds us of the importance of preparedness, of community, of the indomitable spirit that resides within us all. So, the next time you see a zombie movie, don't just dismiss it as mindless entertainment. Think about the questions it raises, the possibilities it explores, and the glimpse it offers into the resilience of the human spirit.